Where has it gone, the life we used to know? It lies in ruin like our fields and homes. Brick by brick, our cities tumble down. Where buildings stood now, chimneys stand alone. Where railroads ran and bridges spanned is now a sad disgrace. The agony of poverty is written on each face. And where has it gone, the life we used to know?
For many returning Confederate soldiers, even the home they used to know was no longer.
Yankee soldiers went home with war wounds, and often to families that had lost husbands, sons, or brothers, but their homes and cities were standing. And life in the North went on as usual. In fact, agriculture, trade, and industry were booming. The war had opened the way to fortune for some of the nation's most powerful industrial empires: Carnegie Iron and Steel, Rockefeller Oil, Armour Meatpacking.
These were the contrasts between North and South as the federal government sought to readmit the Confederate States to the Union and to cope with the most controversial and emotion-laden issue of them all: the future of the newly freed slaves, most of them now homeless, hungry, and uneducated. Many blacks looked forward with hope to a new era.
Free workmen in the cotton field and in the sugar cane. Free children in the common school with nevermore a chain.
Some, seeing nowhere else to turn, chose the security of staying with their former owners. But most blacks left the plantations, settling for whatever crude shelter they could find. Thousands were dying of starvation and disease.
Don't tell me what a blessing it is for black folks to be free. Freedom don't bring bread and bacon, things ain't like they ought to be.
President Lincoln had tried to rekindle a spirit of union in his second inaugural address. He spoke of malice toward none and charity for all. But Lincoln met opposition from all sides. Many leaders in Congress believed that he was too compassionate toward the Confederate States, and that his plan for readmitting them on easy terms would in practice restore the old master-slave structure in the South.
Many Southern leaders, on the other hand, saw Lincoln as a hated enemy, the man who had freed the slaves.
But most Americans, black and white, saw Lincoln as the one man who could reunite the nation on a new path. Barely 5 days after the war ended, Lincoln was shot to death by John Wilkes Booth. Most people were overcome with shock and grief.
The nation in grief is mourning today. The chief of our land is taken away. So toll the bell mournfully, toll the bell slow, toll the bell solemnly, toll the bell low.
When Andrew Johnson became president, radical Republican leaders who had opposed Lincoln's forgiving policies toward the South had high hopes that harsher terms would now be imposed. These radical Republicans, such as Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, wanted the federal government to guarantee political rights and economic benefits to the newly freed slaves. But Johnson was not especially concerned with the plight of the black people, and he shattered the hopes of the radical Republicans. With policies that quickly resulted in new state governments dedicated to keeping blacks second-class citizens.
Embittered whites committed atrocities against blacks who attempted to claim their rights as citizens. Laws known as black codes were passed to restrict blacks to menial employment and otherwise deprive them of their newly won rights. Blacks received some protection from agents of the Freedmen's Bureau, an organization established by Congress at the end of the war.
We heard the Freedmen's Bureau would help us get our due.
The Freedmen's Bureau gave blacks food, medical care, and guidance, but could not provide the one thing they needed most: land.
Well, they lend a hand, but then they give no land to help us start anew.
Without land or money, blacks were forced to hire themselves out as sharecroppers.
You know, they say we're free, but it's news to me, 'cause we're working for the master still. To get our freedom is a constant struggle. Oh Lord, we've struggled so long, but we're still not free, we're still not free.
Enraged by the results of Johnson's policies, the radical Republicans refused to recognize the new Southern state governments or to seat their representatives. After lengthy committee hearings, Congress drew up a Reconstruction plan, which denied the Southern states readmission until the blacks were assured full civil rights, including the right to vote.
A condition which seemed especially unfair to Southerners, since in the North, most blacks were still confined to menial work and deprived of the vote.
President Johnson reacted by vetoing every Reconstruction measure passed by Congress, including a civil rights bill and an act extending the life of the Freedmen's Bureau.
Look out, Andy, mend your way, or you'll be sorry come election day.
The issue came to a head in the congressional elections of 1866. The overwhelming majority of Northerners showed where their sympathies lay by giving the radical Republicans more than 2/3 of the seats in both the House and the Senate, enough to override any presidential veto. To curb what they saw as Johnson's destructive actions, the Republican Congress passed laws limiting the president's power. After he defied one such law, congressional leaders served him with an impeachment summons, charging high crimes and misdemeanors. After a long Senate trial, Johnson was acquitted, but by only one vote. His effectiveness was destroyed, and meanwhile Congress set about establishing its own Reconstruction policies.
Congress's basic plan was formulated in the first Reconstruction Act of March 1867. This act divided the South into 5 districts, headed by military governors. Local rule was to be restored only after each state held a constitutional convention, chosen by universal male suffrage. Each state was required to ratify the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing everyone equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment soon prohibited states from depriving people of the right to vote on grounds of race or color. By the summer of 1868, reconstructed governments had been set up in 8 southern states. The other 3 were reconstructed in 1870. This political awakening brought to the fore a remarkable number of capable, educated black leaders, such as Robert Brown Elliott of South Carolina, who became one of 20 blacks elected to the House of Representatives. The new state constitutions uniformly gave people more rights, and opportunities to take part in governing themselves than had any pre-war Southern state constitution.
If you miss me in the cotton fields and you can't find me nowhere, just come on over to the courthouse. I'll be voting right there.
Not only were blacks given voting rights, poor white males also were able to vote and even run for office for the first time, as property qualifications for voting and office holding were removed. New laws enlarged the rights of women and, most significantly, provided for universal public education, another change that benefited poor whites as well as blacks. Northern philanthropies, black and white, established more than 30 institutions of higher learning in the South. Educated Northern blacks, teachers, lawyers, ministers, came south to help their people. For Confederate diehards, to accept a black man as an equal was unthinkable, as a leader beyond the realm of possibility. Many Southerners, including the diehards, felt that changes were being imposed on them by the very conquerors who had destroyed their land.
Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not give a damn. I'm glad I fit against it, and I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I'd done.
But all white Southerners did not think alike. Some were willing to accept the new order and work with blacks, becoming known among the diehards as scalawags, worthless animals. Northern whites who moved south were equally unpopular with the unreconstructed rebels. Some of these Northerners came with high ideals. Others came for personal gain, hoping to profit from the opportunities opened up during this period of drastic change. But good and bad alike were given the derogatory label carpetbagger.
Up north I got no education, and of wealth I could not brag. Down south I'm a political sensation with a big plantation stuffed in my carpet bag.
Some unscrupulous whites capitalized on the political inexperience of some of their black colleagues, helping themselves to public funds. One black politician who accepted a bribe explained, "I've been sold in my life 11 times. This is the first time I ever got the money." The corruption in Southern legislatures during Reconstruction was a small-scale version of what became a national disease.
Honesty's all out of fashion. These are the rigs of the time, me boys. These are the rigs of the time.
A series of sensational scandals during the administration of President Grant, who was elected in 1868, involved wholesale corruption in big business and government. In the North, corruption was rampant also at the city and state levels. The notorious Tweed Ring in New York was paralleled by equally dishonest political machines in Pennsylvania, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and elsewhere.
But even in an era of national lawlessness, nothing matched the acts of violence committed by the secret organizations that whites began to form in the South to combat what they saw as the threat of growing black power. Black schoolhouses were burned to the ground. Educate a Negro and you lose a good field hand was the justification.
Hooded men steal through the night to deliver a message in the pale moonlight.
Many blacks were terrorized. But some attempted to fight back.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the cottonwood trees.
At first, the federal government cracked down on terrorist activities. But Northern interest in the problems of the South was not sustained. Northerners became absorbed in their own problems as rapid industrialization and the growth of cities brought enormous changes. Blacks who migrated from the South met hostility in the North. Northern whites also turned against the black elephant, the radical Republicans who supported the blacks. As the radicals lost control of the party, the industrialists who had amassed huge fortunes gained political power, and the leadership of the Republican Party fell into their hands.
In the South, white Democrats gradually regained control of the state governments. By the mid-1870s, every Democratic candidate could count on solid support from the white South. As a result, in the election of 1876, the Democrat, Samuel Tilden, actually appeared to be the winner, but ballots from 3 southern states were in dispute.
A Congressional Electoral Commission decided the election, giving the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, the presidency. The Democrats in Congress finally gave their support to Hayes as the result of a compromise. Hayes would end the military occupation of the South. Shortly after his inauguration, Hayes withdrew all federal troops, and the 10-year period of Reconstruction was over.
The end of Reconstruction unleashed the most ruthless torrent of racist violence in the nation's history. In 1877, we lost all hopes, said one freedman. The whole South has got into the hands of the very men that held us slaves. While the Union had been restored, the economic, political, and social gulf dividing North and South was in some ways deepened by the experience of the Reconstruction years. The aftermath of the Civil War marked the beginning of America's emergence as the major industrial power on earth. But for 100 years, the South would remain the poorest section of the nation, resisting social change and modernization in industry and education. Civil rights had been extended to blacks, but during this time, the constitutional amendments did little toward establishing genuine racial equality. Still, the struggles and accomplishments of the war and the Reconstruction era were not in vain. A century later, a new generation of blacks and whites would begin to build from this foundation.